Hello, Bryn. I can't start chapter 19 yet without reminding you about the first chapter. Because the characters from the first chapter come back in chapter 19. Now you might be thinking, who are these characters? Well, the characters are named Kate and Mrs. May. Mrs. May was an elderly woman, and she lived in the young person named Kate's house in London. And Kate would come and visit Miss May, and Miss May would teach her to crochet, and Kate would ask Miss May to tell her stories. If you want, you can go back and listen to the start of chapter 1 if you want to remember a little bit more about Miss May and Kate. But here's chapter 19. "And that," said Mrs. May, laying down her crochet hook, "is really the end." Kate stared at her. "Oh, it can't be," she gasped. "Oh, please, please." "The last square," said Mrs. May, smoothing it out on her knee. "The 150th. Now we can sew them together." "Oh," said Kate, breathing again. "The quilt. I thought you meant the story." "It's the end of the story, too," said Miss May absently. "Or the beginning. He never saw them again." And she began to sort out the squares. "But," stammered Kate, "you can't, it's not fair," she cried. It's cheating." Tears sprang to her eyes. She threw her work down on the table and her crochet hook after it. And she kicked the bag of wools which lay beside her on the carpet. "Why, Kate!" Miss May looked genuinely surprised. "Something more must have happened," cried Kate angrily. "What about the rat catcher and the police officers and the—" "But something more did happen," said Miss May. "A lot more happened. I'm going to tell you." "Then why did you just say it was the end?" "Because," said Miss May. She still looked surprised. "He never saw them again." "Then how can there be more?" "Because," said Miss May, "there is more. A lot more." Kate glared at her. "All right," she said. "Go on." Miss May looked back at her. "Kate," she said after a moment, "stories never really end. They can go on and on and on. It's just that sometimes at a certain point one stops telling them." "But not at this kind of point," said Kate. "Well, thread your needle," said Mrs. May, "with gray wool this time, and we'll sew these squares together. I'll start at the top, and you can start at the bottom. First a gray square, then an emerald, then a pink, and so on." "Then you didn't really mean it?" said Kate irritably, trying to push the folded wool through the narrow eye of the needle, "when you said he never saw them again?" "But I did mean it," said Miss May. "I'm telling you just what happened. He had to leave suddenly at the end of the week because there was a boat for India and the family who could take him. And for the 3 days before he left, they kept him locked up in those 2 rooms. "For 3 days?" exclaimed Kate. "Yes. Mrs. Driver, it seemed, told Aunt Sophie that he had a cold. She was determined, you see, to keep him out of the way until she got rid of the borrowers." "And did she?" asked Kate. Did they all come? The police officers, the rat catcher, and the sanitary inspector didn't come. At least not while my brother was there. And they didn't have the rat catcher from the town hall, but they had the local man. The police officer came," Mrs. May laughed. "During those 3 days, Mrs. Driver used to give my brother a running commentary on what was going on down below. She loved to grumble and my brother, rendered harmless and shut up away upstairs, became a kind of neutral. She used to bring his meals up, and on the first morning she brought up the doll's furniture on the breakfast tray and made my brother climb the shelves and put it back in the dollhouse. It was then she told him about the policeman. Furious, he said she was. Why? Asked Kate. Because the police officer turned out to be Nellie Runacker's son Ernie, a boy Mrs. Driver had chased many times for stealing russet apples from the tree by the gate. A nasty, thieving, good-for-nothing driblet of no good, she told my brother. Sitting down there he is now, in the kitchen, large as life, with his notebook out, laughing fit to bust. 21, he says he is now, and as cheeky as you make 'em. And was he, asked Kate, round-eyed, a driblet of no good? Of course not. Any more than my brother was. Ernie Runacker was a fine, upstanding young man, and a credit to the police force. And he did not actually laugh at Mrs. Driver when she told him her story, but he gave her a look that Cramfurl spoke of afterwards as an old-fashioned look, when she described homily in bed. Take more water with it, it seemed to say. More water with what? Asked Kate. The fine old pale Madeira, I suppose, said Mrs. May. And great Aunt Sophie had the same suspicion. She was furious when she heard that Mrs. Driver had seen several little people, when she herself, on a full decanter, had only risen to 1 or 2 at most. Cramfurl had to bring all the Madeira up from the cellar and stack the cases against the wall in a corner of Aunt Sophie's bedroom, where, as she said, she could keep an eye on it. Did they get a cat? Asked Kate. Yes, they did. But that wasn't much of a success either. It was Cramfurl's cat, large yellow Tom with white streaks in it. According to Mrs. Driver, it had only 2 ideas in its head: to get out of the house or into the larder. Talk of borrowers, Miss Driver would say as she slammed down the fish pie from my brother's luncheon. That cat's a borrower if I ever saw one. Borrowed the fish, the cat did, and a good half bowl of egg sauce. But the cat wasn't there long. First thing the rat catcher's terriers did was to chase it out of the house. There was a dreadful set to, my brother said. They chased it everywhere, upstairs, downstairs, in and out of all the rooms, barking their heads off. The last glimpse my brother had of the cat was streaking away through the spinney and across the fields with the terriers after it. Did they catch it? No, Mrs. May laughed. It was still there when I went a year later. A little morose, but fit as a fiddle. Tell about when you went. Oh, I wasn't there long, said Mrs. May rather hastily. And after that house was sold, my brother never went back. Kate stared at her suspiciously, pressing her needle against the center of her lower lip. So they never caught the little people, she said at last. Mrs. May's eyes flicked away. No, they never actually caught them, but... She hesitated. As far as my poor brother was concerned, what they did do seemed even worse. What did they do? Mrs. May laid down her work and stared for a moment thoughtfully at her idle hands. I hated the rat catcher, she said suddenly. Why? Did you know him? Everybody knew him. He had a walleye, and his name was Rich William. He was also the pig killer, and, well, he did other things as well. He had a gun, a hatchet, spade, a pickaxe, and a contraption with bellows for smoking things out. I don't know what the smoke was exactly. Poison fumes of some kind, which he made himself from herbs and chemicals. I only remember the smell of it. It clung around the barns or wherever he'd been. You can imagine what my brother felt on the third day, the day he was leaving, when suddenly he smelled that smell. He was all dressed and ready to go. The bags were packed and down in the hall. Mrs. Driver came and unlocked the door and took him down the passage to Aunt Sophie. He stood there, stiff and pale, in gloves and overcoat beside the curtained bed. Seasick already? Aunt Sophie mocked him, peering down at him over the edge of the great mattress. No, he said, it's the smell. Aunt Sophie lifted her nose. She sniffed. What smell is it, Driver? It's the rat catcher, my lady, explained Mrs. Driver, reddening. Down in the kitchen? What? Exclaimed Aunt Sophie. Are you smoking them out? And she began to laugh. Oh dear, she gasped. But if you don't like them, Mrs. Driver, the remedy's simple. What is that, my lady? Asked Mrs. Driver coldly, but even her chins were red. Helpless with mirth, Aunt Sophie waved a ringed hand towards her. Her eyes were screwed up and her shoulders shaking. Keep the bottle corked! She managed at last and motioned them weakly away. They heard her laughing still as she went down the stairs. She don't believe in them, muttered Mrs. Driver, and she tightened her grip on my brother's arm. More fool her. She'll change her tune, like enough when I take them up afterwards, laid out in sizes on a clean piece of newspaper. And she dragged him roughly across the hall. The clock had been moved, exposing the wainscot, and as my brother saw at once, the hole had been blocked and sealed. The front door was open as usual, and the sunshine streamed in. The bag stood there beside the fibre mat, cooking a little in the golden warmth. The fruit trees beyond the bank and sheds had their petals and were lit with tender green and transparent in the sunlight. Plenty of time, said Mrs. Driver, glancing up at the clock. The cab's not due until 3:30. The clock stopped, said my brother. Mrs. Driver turned. She was wearing her hat and her best black coat, ready to take him to the station. She looked strange and tight, like a chapel going, not a bit like Driver. So it has, she said. Her jaw dropped and her cheeks became heavy and pendulous. It's moving it, she decided after a moment. It'll be all right, she went on, once we get it back. Mr. Frith comes on Monday, and she dragged again at his arm above the elbow. Where are we going? He asked, holding back. Along to the kitchen. We've got a good 10 minutes. Don't you want to see them caught? No, he said, no, and pulled away from her. Mrs. Driver stared at him, smiling a little. I do, she said. I'd like to see 'em close. He puffs this stuff in, and they come running out. At least that's how it worked with the rats. But first, he says, you block up all the exits. And her eyes followed his to the hole below the wainscot. How did they find it? The boy asked. Puttied it looked, and with a square of brown paper plastered on crooked. Rich William found it. That's his job. They could unstick that, the boy said after a moment. Mrs. Driver laughed. Oh, no, they couldn't. Cemented, that is. A great block of it, right inside, with sheet of iron across from the front of the old stove in the outhouse. He and Crampfurl had to have the morning room floor up to get at it. All Tuesday they was workin' up until tea time. We aren't going to have no more capers of that kind. Not under the clock. Once you get that clock back, it can't be moved again in a hurry. Now, not if you want to keep time, it can't. See where it stood? Were the floors washed away like that? It was then my brother saw for the first and the last time that raised platform of unscrubbed stone. "Come on now," said Mrs. Driver, and took him by the arm. "We'll hear the cab from the kitchen." But the kitchen, as she dragged him through the baize door, seemed a babel of sound. No approaching cab could be heard here. What with yelps and barks and stampings and excited voices, "Steady, steady, steady," Crampfurl was saying, on one loud note, as he held back the rat-catcher's terriers, which shrilled and panted on the leash. The policeman was there, Nellie Runniker's son Ernie. He had come out of interest and stood back from the others a little, in view of his calling, with a cup of tea in his hand and his helmet pushed off his forehead. But his face was pink with boyish excitement, and he stirred the teaspoon round and round. "Seeing is believing," he said cheerfully to Mrs. Driver when he saw her come in at the door. A boy from the village was there with a ferret. It kept sort of pouring out of his pocket, my brother said, and the boy kept pushing it back in. Rich William himself was crouched on the floor by the hole. He had lighted something beneath a piece of sacking, and the stench of its smouldering eddied out about the room. He was working the bellows now, with infinite care, stooping over them, rapt and tense. My brother stood there, as though it a dream. Perhaps it was a dream, he said to me later, much later, after we were all grown up. He gazed around the kitchen. He saw the sunlit fruit trees through the window, and a bough of the cherry tree which stood upon the bank. He saw the empty teacups on the table, with spoons stuck in them, and one without a saucer. He saw, propped up against the wall, close behind the baize door, the rat-catcher's belongings: a frayed coat, patched with leather, a bundle of rabbit snares, 2 sacks, a spade, a gun, and a pickaxe. "Stand by now," Rich William was saying. There was a rising noise of excitement in his voice, but he did not turn his head. "Stand by. Ready now to slip the dogs." This is a I always say that, a drawing of the kitchen. I'm always kind of weirded out how they draw Crampfurl so furry and like big ears, almost like he's a chimpanzee or something. Curious. Mrs. Driver let go of my brother's arm and moved towards the hole. "Keep back," said the rat-catcher without turning. "Give us room." And Mrs. Driver backed nervously towards the table. She put a chair beside it and half raised one knee, but lowered it again when she caught Ernie Runniker's mocking glance. "All right, Ma," he said, cocking one eyebrow. "We'll give you a leg up when the time comes." And Mrs. Driver threw him a furious look. She snatched up the 3 cups from the table and stumped away with them, angrily, into the scullery. Seemingly less smunch of something or other, my brother heard her mutter as she brushed past him. And at those words, suddenly, my brother came to life. He threw a quick glance about the kitchen. The men were absorbed. All eyes were on the rat-catcher, except those of the village boy, who was getting out his ferret. Stealthily, my brother drew off his gloves and began to move backwards, slowly, towards the green baize door. As he moved, gently stuffing his gloves into his pocket, he kept his eyes on the group around the hole. He paused a moment beside the rat-catcher's tool and stretched out a wary, groping hand. His fingers closed at last on a wooden handle. Smooth it was, and worn with wear. He glanced down to make sure. Yes, it was as he hoped, the pickaxe. He leaned back a little and pushed almost imperceptibly against the door with his shoulder, and it opened sweetly in its silent way. Not one of the men had looked up. "Steady now," the rat-catcher was saying, stooping closely over the bellows. "It takes a moment, like, to go right through. There ain't much ventilation, not under the floor." My brother slid through the barely open door, and it sighed to behind him, closing without the noise. He took a few steps on tiptoe down the dark kitchen passage, and then he ran. There was the hall again, steeped in sunshine, with his bags beside the door. He bumped against the clock, and it struck a note, a trembling note, urgent and deep. He raised the pickaxe to the height of his shoulder and aimed a sideways blow at the hole below the wainscot. The paper tore, a few crumbs of plaster fell out, and the pickaxe rebounded sharply, jarring in his hands. There was indeed iron behind the cement, something immovable. Again he struck, and again and again. The wainscot above the hole became split and scratched, and the paper hung down in strips, but still the pickaxe bounced. It was no good. His hands, wet with sweat, were sliding and slipping on the wood. He paused for breath, and looking out, he saw the cab. He saw it on the road, beyond the hedge, on the far side of the orchard. Soon it would reach the russet apple tree beside the gate. Soon it would turn into the driveway. He glanced up at the clock. It was ticking steadily, the result, perhaps, of his knock. The sound gave him comfort and steadied his thumping heart. Time, that's what he needed. A little more time. "It takes a moment, like," the rat-catcher had said, "to go right through. There ain't much ventilation, not under the floor." Ventilation. That was the word, the saving word. Pickaxe in hand, my brother ran out the door. He stumbled once on the gravel path and nearly fell. The pickaxe handle came up and struck him a sharp blow on the temple. Already, when he reached it, a thin filament of smoke was eddying out of the grating, and he thought as he ran toward it that there was a flicker of movement against the darkness between the bars. And that was where they would be, of course, to get the air. But he did not stop to make sure. Already he heard behind him the crunch of wheels on the gravel, and the sound of the horse's hooves. He was not, as I told you, a very strong little boy, and he was only 9. Not 10, as he had boasted to Arietti. But, with 2 great blows on the brickwork, he dislodged one end of the grating. It fell down sideways, sharply on a slant, hanging, it seemed, by one nail. Then he clambered up the bank and threw the pickaxe with all his might into the long grass beyond the cherry tree. He remembered thinking as he stumbled back, sweaty and breathless, towards the cab, how that, too, the loss of the pickaxe would cause its own kind of trouble later. That is the end of chapter 19. There is an image here of the damage the boy did to the grating. Well, we've got one last chapter. I hope you're enjoying and you were able to maybe go back and read some of chapter 1 to understand who Mrs. May and Kate are. Ta-ta for now.